Hello, everyone. This is Mark Armini. Today I'm going to talk about Chapter 1 of The Wizard Knight. I have a microphone here, and I'm hoping that it works. I was fiddling around with it, and the first little video I did, I couldn't hear anything, so I don't know if it's actually going to be better than the computer mic or not. So I'm going to endeavor to actually speak pretty loudly here. I hope that it's using it. I'm pretty ignorant of these matters. So in any case, Chapter 1 of The Wizard Knight here starts off, immediately with Abel, the narrator, displaced from his origin, right? He kind of chases these clouds he sees in the sky, and he plays with, the spiny orange, he says. So we're just going to go pretty quickly through this first chapter. I think we'll just stick with chapter 1 today. Then we'll probably do 2 chapters at a time after this. So I just want to not do too much until I hear how this sound comes out. So chapter 1, Dear Ben, it's a letter. Right? It's a letter he's writing to his brother that he's left behind in America, and there's something that we need to pay attention to, and that's how letters appear throughout the entirety of the text. Because on the final pages, he says, Michael, the angel, right, has found a way to deliver this letter to you, right? And he's writing it because somehow when he looked at Bold Berthold through the helm of true seeing, he saw his brother Ben there, right? And so this letter is not the only letter in the text. The other important letter is the one he finds on the Isle of Glass at the top there, where that green tube holds the letter from his mother, ostensibly, even though it's the mother of Bold and the other Abel, if there really is another Abel. And when he's in the Room of Lost Loves, right, in the second volume, when you look up actually what the Room of Lost Loves is in the index here, it says, a room that was like another world when you got inside. Sometimes dead people were alive again in there. So when he's in there, he actually exits through a green tube as if he becomes that letter from his mother, right? And so the letter is delivered by Michael. And Gene Wolfe loves to play with these kind of things there, right? If something couldn't be delivered, Michael's going to deliver it in a different form. Abel becomes the letter. He also learns in the Room of Lost Love why he's named that. So we're going to get to all of that, but it's important to contextualize. This letter has a kind of metonymic resonance throughout there. It's something that Michael is going to deliver. And we see that when Abel's in the Room of Lost Love, where the dead are alive again somehow, he feels as if he never leaves, even though he becomes the letter as Eternae is kind of slapping at his thigh as he walks out of it. And that's a key kind of thematic moment that we'll return to here. So at the start here, this first paragraph, which I went over last time, I'm just going to look at it again. You must have stopped wondering what happened to me a long time ago. I know it's been many years. I have the time to write here and what looks like a good chance to get what I write to where you are. So I'm going to try. If I just told everything on a couple of sheets, you'd not believe most of it. Hardly any of it, because there are many things that I have trouble with myself. So what I'm going to do instead is tell everything. When I've finished, you still may not believe me. But you know all that I do. In some ways, that's a lot. In others, practically nothing. When I saw you sitting by our fire, my own brother, there on the battlefield. Never mind. I'll get to it. Only I think it may be why I'm writing now. So he looked at Bold there, and I want to say very, very quickly, one of the key things to understand here is that Wolfe is a master at syncretizing so many different traditions, so many different, resonances and allusions there. So interestingly enough, in this kind of Norse pantheon that we're going to get here in part, right, you'll see that some people have kind of paralleled Abel with Balder, right? That they're like, okay, maybe there's a doom that's enacted here, and so there's something very interesting about Balder, though. His name means bold, more or less. Now, he's killed accidentally by his blind brother, Hoder, right? And we'll detail this myth a little bit later, but it's an accident. His blind brother kills him. Well, Bold is blind in the text here, right? The character Bold who's going to appear. But there is a way in which Abel and Bold, in my reading, kind of join a little bit through this chimeric twinship. So we're going to also play with the allusion to the name Abel, where Cain, kills his brother. But in this text, right, where you have Abel and Arthur Ormsby at home, then you have Arthur, whose sibling does not start with a B. His sibling is more Cain, right? And he's very selfish. So we're going to come back to that resonance as well with the story of Abel and Cain here. But overall, right, on the surface level, we're going to get the sense that time is a little bit fluid, even in the regular text here, because there's going to be a vision that he sees soon that's like him as an adult knight looking back on what's happening to make sure he plants a seed here, as Parka instructed him. So let's go ahead from here. All right. Now, here he's thinking about his life in America, and we're actually going to get an explanation for this in the first chapter as well. Remember the day we drove out to the cabin? Then Jerry phoned. That's the G figure that is the girlfriend of Ben in America, right? You had to go home and did not need a kid around, so he said there was no reason for me to go too. I could stay out there, you'd come back the next day. We said I would fish. Fish are going to appear in a dream where he's swimming with them a little bit later. So that imagery, right, with the silver and red association is also going to be a little bit seminal in nature as we go. Only I did not. It did not seem like it was going to be much fun with you gone, but the air was crisp and the leaves were turning, so I went on a hike. Maybe it was a mistake. I went a long way, but I was not lost. Pretty soon I picked up a stick and hiked with it, but it was crooked and not very strong. I did not like it much. Decided I would cut a good one I could keep out at the cabin and use whenever we were there. All right, so far he's just kind of peregrinating through America. Now soon he's going to follow the clouds, right? He's going to see like that castle in the sky almost with his crenellations there. And as I said in that first video, I want you to think of everything that happens in this text in a somewhat sexualized, organic fashion. When he's chasing after those images in the sky, right? When he's in that cave waiting for the slack of the tide, when he sees that phallic tower, bluestone tower there, even when, let's say, the child Osir appears, the mother, her head has been split open by the father, right? All of that stuff is the same kind of imagery that's going on throughout here, because he's going to get grabbed and pulled down below here in a little bit by the elf on his sojourn. All right, so this is the tree, and this is kind of important. I saw a tree. It was different from all the others. It was not very big. It had white bark and shiny leaves. It was a spiny orange tree, Ben, but I'd never heard of them. Later, Bold Berthold told me a lot. It was too big for me to cut the whole thing, but I found a branch that was almost straight. I cut off that and trimmed it and so forth. That may have been the main thing, my main mistake. They're not like other trees. The mossmen care more about them. Now, this is the thing when you're dealing with Wolfe, right? How much of it would be actual, like metaphor, and how much of it would be, okay, this is just surface stuff here. So we're going to find, as the text progresses, that whenever there's a tree or somebody takes off a branch and fences with it, right? That green etern really is symbolized by it, that growth, that fecundity. And this spiny orange is no different, even though it might be based, according to a post on Reddit recently, which I thought was pretty interesting, on the Osage orange tree, right? And that is something that's anachronistic in nature, right? It has its fruit there. It can no longer germinate in the way that it was originally intended, but it still exists, right? So the fruit kind of falls and it rots right there. But it's good for making bows, just as, this one would be good for making bows as well, we think here, right? Or any kind of hard wood there. So we'll return to that and the features of it just a little bit later. But he leaves the path here, right? He leaves his path from the woods where he's ostensibly alone, and he finds a little spring at the top of a hill, right? And so he starts whittling, and he looks up at the clouds, and he sees pictures there. An old man with a beard, and the wind changed into a black dragon. Then he sees a horse with a horn on its head, which could resonate with his horse Cloud a little bit later, right? Even though, that seems to be more like a different kind of flying horse there, right? We see the unicorn here. A beautiful lady who smiled down at me. Now, in the next chapter, we're going to learn that clouds are the breath of the lady, and that's going to become important as well. So, what does he see there? A flying castle, all spiky like a star, because there were towers and turrets coming out of all its sides. And so, even though it didn't look like a cloud, he chases after it. And so this is the first seminal imagery that we're getting, where he's actually chasing after this cloud. And he's even going to show up with a little knife that he didn't know how he got in a bit. Right? So the imagery here where he's chasing after the cloud and he's going to wind up somewhere else. So he's chasing after it, waiting for the wind to blow it apart, but it doesn't. right? So night comes. He can't see the castle any longer. And then, right, someone grabs him in the dark and pulls him down. And he kind of hears, "Who comes to Alfreece?" Right? So I'm going to usually just use the anglicized, Americanized version of most of these pronunciations. I apologize if those are a little bit difficult for some people to get behind there. But in general, I think that'll be easier just to go with. So, I'm going to Americanize everything. I apologize for that. So he's grabbed by a lot of people, and then there's a break in the text. So in the surface story, this is where he gets to frolic with the elf, right? Below, right, in Alfreece, below Mythgarther, really, right, in the seven realms where he shows up. He winds up in the middle world, Mythgarther, at first. But here he stays for a time, and he says it's if he was held back. Okay, and we're going to talk about the implications of this gap just a little bit later for the surface story. But clearly he comes to know Desiree at this particular point in time. So he's pulled in. And then we get this. "I woke up in a cave by the sea where an old lady with too many teeth sat spinning. And when I'd pulled myself together and found my stick, I asked where we were, trying to be as polite as I could. 'Can you tell me what place this is, ma'am, and how to get to Griffonsford from here?' And so he believes that Griffonsford is where they lived. But he also says, I can't really remember. It's all mixed up somehow in my head." And this is going to be repeated as well. The idea that his memories are a little bit mixed up. This is also going to explain his memories of America. Because Parca, the woman in this cave here, who's named after the Roman fates, right? These are the Moirae, more or less. The Parcae are the three goddesses. In Greek, that's what? Clothos, Atropos. Let's see here. Let's not get this wrong here. So, Clotho, Atropos, and Lachesis, right, in Greek. But that's Nona, Decima, and Morta in the Roman tradition. And there are three of them, right? They spin the thread of life, they measure the thread, and then they cut the thread. Well, guess what, right? There's a reason that this thread is going to be cut, okay, right here as it's spun. Because this Parcae is all three of them, because Abel's life doesn't really get to begin, right? So we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but there's a reason that it's 3 in 1. Now, in the cave here, she tells him to plant a seed, right? And this string that she gives him connects him to America. So ostensibly, the dreams from America come through this string, but, right, what is it really? Okay, it's going to be used to strangle Setter a little bit later. It has this connection, right? And he's going to dream a lot of mother through it. So in my reading, of course, this is the umbilicus, right? And so when we see the different aspects of the Jungian dream that was sent to the mother from the future after he's dead, this is all in retrospect. It's already happened, right, to him. So that Jungian dream is a metaphor for things, and it repeats the same motifs over and over here. So she asks, "Do you know how I got," or he asks, excuse me, "Do you know how I got here?" And she laughs, and the wind and sea are in it. And she was the spray and the waves that broke outside her cave, right? When I talked to her, I was talking to them. That was how I felt. Does it sound crazy? I'd been crazy since I was born. Now I was sane, and it felt wonderful. Okay, so yes, he does have memories of America here. And we're going to talk about how he got them in just a little bit, right? He says nature's not something outside anymore. She was a big part of it, and I was a little part of it, and I'd been gone too long. Later, Garsig said the sea had healed me. So when he's in the sea, he's going to realize that he's a creature of the sea and the womb, just as his mother was in her mother's womb. So he goes to the mouth of the cave there, and she tells him you have to wait for the slack of the tide. And so he does, but when he looks there, right in the string, he sees faces and arms and legs coming out it, and then she tells him who he is. You're Abel of the High Heart. So Parca gives him this name, and he tells her his old name, right? So on the surface level, he had this life in America. He's come to this realm. He's given a new identity here. And yet it still seems a kind of beginning, because we have this deity figure who measures out life here, and she also cuts the thread and gives it to him, right? She's spinning right there. And she says to him, some loss must be, so this I decree. The lower your lady, the higher love. And of course we know that he's going to become enamored with Desiree. And I'm going to explain kind of the the cosmology when it comes up the first time here. But for now, right, we just realize that, hey, there's levels, right? And the one that he has this fixation for is actually of a lower level than he is right there. So she says there has to be some kind of forfeit for his insolence in questioning her, right? And so, does this imply the first time you read it that he's only going to love unworthily? One of the key themes of this is, can love raise something else up? Or if you love something unworthily in the wrong direction, are you dragged down by it, right? And at the very end, he's going to descend rather than ascend, but he seems to triumph in other ways morally as he grows. And we're going to talk about the bullying in context a little bit later as well. So I don't want to get too much into that. But this is how his name changes, right? And she goes back to her spinning, and she tells him, "You'll sink before you rise, and rise before you sink." And so normally the prophecies in the first chapter are pretty significant. We'll deal with this a little bit later and what sinking actually implies for the text here. But he's scared by this, right? And so he asks who she is, and she says she's Parca. Now, she's supposed to be from Kleos. Now, in Greek tradition, Kleos is glory, more or less, right? And it's not just like renown. It's also like material recognition for that glory that you get. There's a material element as well. So eventually we'll break down the layers there and what they imply. But it's pretty high up there. But she's down here talking to Abel, this American boy, right? And he asks how he got there. And she just points toward the back of the cave where everything is black. And he says, I don't remember being there. So it's almost as if he didn't come from the entrance of the cave, right? He came from the back. And she says, well, some memories have been taken away from you, right? The recollection is gone there. And he realizes that is right. So he was chasing the clouds. This is what he says. All that had been a long time ago. After it, there had been a lot I could not remember at all. And she says, the elf carried you to me. Who are the elf? She says, don't you know? And then something very creepy comes in here, right? He's looking at the back of the cave, and he feels that she's looming huge behind him somehow, right? But then when he looks at her, she's actually smaller than he is. And so the other thing he notices, I knew when I was little, I'd known all about the elf, and it was all mixed up with somebody else, a little girl who played with me. There'd been big, big trees and ferns a lot bigger than we were, and clear springs and moss, lots of moss, soft green moss like velvet. So on the metatextual level, right, when he's mixed up with another girl, this is both insemination of the egg, right? Desiree's a stripe changer and all her forms are beautiful, chasing the spiky little castle like that and getting pulled in there. When he finds Desiree, he's going to grow up instantly, right? And then he won't be able to find her. But also, this is the memories that are mixed up with his mother. And later on, we're going to get several ruminations where he says, hey, how far to the dream my mother had, right? Am I just a thought in Desiree's head that she'll always love me like I loved her, but I'm not even real? I'm just a figment of her imagination. And so, yes, right, he is mixed up through the umbilicus there, right? He had those memories of America. He had this initial impression. So these things that happened a long time ago, some of them may have happened to his mother that he shared there. And he's also going to become part of Ben as well, right? And so we'll talk more about this later. But for the surface level plot, right, the elf have sent him with a tale of their wrong. So his overall mission is to tell Arthur, right, of Mythgarther there, to tell him, hey, right, your worship downwards, right, your selfishness, it's not directed. You have to act as an exemplar, as a god for us to look up to, and not worship us downwards, that everything is out of joint, right? And so we'll talk about that hierarchy a little bit more, but this is the message he's supposed to send to Arthur, right? To kind of correct what has gone wrong in the realms there. They're pointing downwards, they're, even the elf, right, where they're pointing downwards there, they've brought Setter up to rule them instead of actually following their gods, the things in the proper order, right? So this could also be like selfishness, where it's not directed upwards towards the greater good, but towards yourself or internally. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this. So they said, they've sent you with a tale of their wrongs and their worship. And he asks, worship? Of you, Abel. So the elf are worshiping, right? Upwards towards Mythgarther there. And then he realizes that he doesn't really care for them that much, and she gives him this important instruction: plant one seed, right? So he's tasked with planting this seed. And so obviously, when Parka, the goddesses all in one of life and its length, tells you to plant a seed, this is a start to something there. And so he waits for her to say something. She doesn't say anything. He lets out his breath, and she tells him, some gain there must be. So this I decree: each time you gain your heart's desire, your heart shall reach for something higher. Right? So Abel of the high heart here, he's supposed to always yearn for something a little bit more. Right? And so that's a good question in this text, actually. Does it follow this outline? Right? How does he sink before he rises and rise before he sinks? And how does he seem to strive always for something higher if he's so obsessed with Desiree from that lower realm there? But he does actually deliver this message that he's been tasked with. So that is the basic plot right there. Hey, go to Arthur. Everything's turned upside down. Tell him, convince him to turn it right side up so that worship goes upwards towards God and not downwards towards something else. Okay. So he says, right, if I ask anything more, I might not like the answers. So then he watches the sun, and I want to look at this scene. The sun stretched out his hands into our cave and blessed us both. Or that was the way it seemed. Then he sank into the sea, and the sea tried to follow him. Pretty soon the place where I'd stood when I'd waded out was hardly wet at all. Is this the slack of the tide? I asked Parka. Wait, she said, right? And then she gives him the string for his bow, okay? He says, I don't have one, all right? But taking the stick there that he's whittled from the spiny orange, that's going to become his bow eventually there. So he goes out there, and when he looks, as he's leaving the cave, he turns around and he sees that it's full of white birds. Of course it's full of white birds, right? If you've been following along, what's this cave going to fill up with? Of course, right? Something that resembles semen, at least somehow. Later on, when he's in the cave, approaching Grengarm, right? And he runs into Morcaine. All those knights who sought out Etern are going to appear, and he has to swim down through the channels there and go up to find her, and she's going to drink from the goblet, and there's going to be a very particular phrase that he repeats, and he's going to say it when he plants this seed here. So I'm just going to go through the last couple paragraphs of the chapter here, and then we'll stop for today. Okay, the stars are out, right? He finds a spot, and this tower stands on a rocky island connected to the mainland, right? So he stares at the waves, and he knows he should leave and find a place to sleep. He doesn't do it because he's tired, and then he starts to think. There was so much I could not remember. What I could remember, you, Ben, in the cabin in the house where we lived, and those pictures you have of Mom and Dad, was a long, long time ago. I wanted to try to remember more, and I wanted to think about what Parka had said and what it might mean. Okay, and so the second chapter, we're going to get the planting of the seed there and a few other things that are more symbolic, like the image of himself looking at the past there, like his adult version going back, which shows the fluidity of time in the dream logic. So let's look at this last paragraph. So I went back to the sheltered place I'd found among the blue stones and lay down. I was barefoot, and it seemed to me while I lay there that I should have had hiking boots and stockings. I could not remember what had become of them. I was wearing a gray wool shirt without buttons and gray wool pants with no pockets. That did not seem right either. I had a belt and a little leather pouch hanging from it by its strings. The only thing in it were Parka's bowstring, 3 hard black seeds, and a little knife with a wooden handle and a wooden scabbard. The knife fit my hand like it belonged there, but I did not remember it at all. So this first chapter ends with that knife. We'll talk about the uses it has for planting the seed a little bit later. But I did want to share something about this text overall, right? And so obviously, this first chapter, I've pushed my thesis pretty hard throughout there because I feel like to understand why Parka is 3 in 1 instead of the 3 goddesses there, you have to understand that, hey, all of that life was compressed right there when she spun this. What is that cord? Why does it attach him? Why are there, arms and legs and all this stuff in it? I mean, it is his connection to America in a way, right? But it's far more unified than at first it seems. Was Wolfe at all actually interested in Jung? Yes, he wrote A Soil and Climate and published it, I think, in 2003, about the time that this was coming out as well. And the main character of that was actually a Jungian therapist who was in prison, right? So he was actually looking at archetypal criticism and Jung in particular at this particular time. And I do want also to read something that was posted on the Facebook group when I had the original video came out here. So this is from Frank O'Connor, and he talks about why The Wizard Knight is great, right? So he's saying, hey, right, this is an awesome book. I've come to consider Wizard Knight one of Wolfe's most challenging, layered, nuanced, and rereadable works. As a sometimes professional writer of genre fiction, I spent decades since high school consuming fantasy and, more frequently, mythology, both in fiction and analysis. While there are zillions of fantasy novels with mythological underpinnings or aspirations, Wizard Knight's simple recipe of contemporary narrator, like Connecticut Yankee, Norse mythology and theology, and the simple expedient of decoupling chivalry and Arthurian lore from Christianity provides the single richest, deepest, and most satisfying perspective on the core tenets of Western fantasy that I've ever read, and deconstructs all of it in ways that don't feel awkward or edgy or uncomfortable. Abel's evolution from pure-hearted good kid to grim-faced warrior and oath-breaking violent combination of Gawain, Thor, Lancelot, and Merlin is extremely satisfying and rich. His traditional hero's journey is in essence very traditional, but the content and perspective feels novel and clever, and the children's fantasy element quickly becomes a source of worry for the reader as Abel gets out of his depth and the text evolves past that without the reader noticing. And so I agree, right? This text does a lot of things besides that simple subtext that I'm pushing through the first chapter here. And we're going to talk about all of those things, right? We're going to talk about chivalry, how Abel's behavior shows through example for the other characters as well how to behave, because the story is about maturity, having models, right? Having an ideal that you're striving towards, and then perhaps not reaching it. Right? And so there's a lot of stuff that's going on in The Wizard Knight beyond the agenda that I'm pushing. So if you hate that reading that I'm, kind of always talking about, obviously, right, I feel like almost every chapter is rife with so many echoes and resonances of it. But I'm going to try to talk about more than that as well. So I probably won't read as much from following chapters. I just wanted to get a sense of how this would feel and work. So if you want me to read less from the chapter, do less commentary, let me know. If you have any comments, right, about this, or you want me to talk about more holistic things from the text, please go ahead, feel free and make a comment there, and I'll try to respond to them. Thank you so much for listening. We'll probably do chapter 2 and 3 for next week, and hopefully you're getting something out of an analysis like this. I do favor the quicker pace. We'll see how it goes.